He looked in the mirror and saw a stranger staring back, a man drowning in wasted time, empty dreams, and silent regret. But one moment, one heartbreaking, soul-shaking moment, changed everything. This is not just a speech. This is a wake-up call for every second you have let slip through your fingers. If you have ever felt lost, stuck, or haunted by the life you are not living, then watch till the end, because this story might just save you from wasting the rest of your life. He stared at the mirror, not at his face, but at the reflection of a clock behind him. Tick, tock, each second slammed into his ears like a hammer on stone. The room was silent, yet inside him, a storm was rising. Dust floated through a beam of morning light, each particle dancing slowly, mocking his stillness. He had spent hours in this chair, scrolling, watching, waiting for something to change, but nothing ever did. His coffee was cold now, untouched, just like his dreams. The list of goals on his wall stared back at him, uncrossed, unstarted, forgotten. He remembered the night he wrote them, eyes burning with fire, heart racing with ambition. He had sworn to begin the next day. That was 2 years ago. A gust of wind rattled the window pane. It sounded like a warning, a whisper from life itself. Wake up. But he remained frozen, not from fear, from habit. He had mastered the art of wasting time, of killing minutes with meaningless noise, of burying hours under distractions. Until now. His phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another trap. He picked it up. Thumb hovered over the screen. Then he saw it. A photo. Of a friend. Smiling. Coffin behind him. The caption said, "Gone too soon. 27. The air punched out of his lungs. Silence became deafening. Everything around him slowed. His hands trembled. His eyes widened. That friend had dreams too. Plans. A future. Now nothing but a memory. He looked at his own reflection again. And for the first time, he saw a stranger. A stranger who had traded years. For comfort. For excuses. For delays. A stranger who might not have tomorrow. The realization hit like a train. Not in the mind, but in the gut. He stood up. Chair scraped back like thunder. His breath was sharp. Eyes burning not with sleep, but shame. And yet, also with something else. A spark. A flicker. A fight. He stood there, motionless for a moment, feeling the full weight of lost time pressed down on his chest like a boulder crushing the air from his lungs. His legs trembled, not from weakness, but from the surge of energy beginning to pulse through his veins. Raw, uncomfortable, unfamiliar. The walls around him seemed to close in, suffocating, each one plastered with memories of what he could have done, should have done, would have done, if only he had begun. His eyes darted around the room, desperate to escape the prison he had built with his own inaction. Books lined the shelves, unread. Journals filled with empty pages. Sketchpads untouched. Projects half finished. Goals half written. Dreams only whispered and never shouted. The silence that had once comforted him now screamed in his ears like sirens, alarming, accusing, relentless. His fists clenched, not in anger at the world, but in fury at himself. He realized he had become a spectator in his own life, watching days pass by as if they belonged to someone else. And for what? For fleeting pleasures? For temporary escapes? For the illusion that there would always be time. His mind raced back to moments he had wasted, hours spent scrolling, days lost to doubt, years buried under the weight of fear. He remembered all the times he said, "I will start tomorrow." But tomorrow had come and gone, countless times, and he had done nothing. The clock ticked again, and this time it felt like a threat. Tick, you are still here. Tock, but you are running out. The image of his friend now gone, burned behind his eyes like fire. Youth lost, potential vanished, a life ended before it could reach its peak. Death was no longer a distant concept. It was real. It was close. And it was coming, whether he moved or not. His heart pounded with a new kind of urgency, not panic, but purpose. He turned toward the door. Every step forward felt like rebellion against every wasted second. His mind, once fogged with distractions, began to clear. Ideas resurfaced. Dreams reignited. The weight of regret began to lift. Not because it was gone, but because he was ready to carry it and move anyway. He pulled open his drawer and grabbed that old notebook, the one he had once filled with wild, impossible ideas. He opened it. The dust stung his eyes, but he welcomed the pain. Each blank page was no longer a symbol of failure. It was a second chance. His pen touched the paper, trembling slightly, as if waking from a coma. One word, then another, until the page came alive with intention. He was writing again. Not just goals, not just tasks, but vision, fire, direction. He looked out the window, and the world looked different, sharper, louder, more alive. The colors seemed to bleed with meaning. The air itself felt electric. Everything had changed, though nothing outside had moved. It was all him. His soul, stirred from the dead. His spirit, resurrected. He went to his mirror once more and stared deep into his own eyes. This time, he did not see a stranger. He saw someone who had fallen, hard, but was choosing to rise. Slowly, stubbornly, purposefully. His jaw tightened. His spine straightened, because in that moment, he understood something most people die before realizing. Time is not waiting. Life is not patient. And comfort is the greatest thief of all. He remembered something his grandfather once told him, a phrase he had ignored for years. Every minute you waste, someone else is using to become what you dream of being. It hit him like lightning now. Harsh, honest, holy. He threw open his door, the sunlight hitting his face like a slap, bright, warm, real. His feet hit the ground hard, fast, with rhythm. Each step was a vow. I will not waste today. I will not let fear decide for me. I will not leave this world with my song unsung. He felt alive, and that aliveness hurt, but it also healed. And as the wind rushed past his ears, whispering through trees and across concrete, it seemed to chant just one thing: run. Run toward the life you have been avoiding. Run like your soul depends on it, because it does. Every second from this moment on would count, not because he owed the world anything, but because he owed himself everything. And time was no longer his enemy. It was his challenge, and he was ready. He was ready, not in the way people say they are when they make promises to themselves and break them a week later, but in the way a man becomes ready when he stands face to face with the truth of his own mortality. Something inside him had shifted permanently, like a fault line cracking beneath the surface after years of pressure. This was not motivation that would fade. This was transformation born out of pain, the kind of pain that does not ask politely, but demands change through the sheer force of discomfort. His feet struck the ground harder now, not just with urgency, but with intent. Every sound of his movement, the thud of his steps, the swing of his arms, the beat of his heart, was part of a new rhythm, a new mission, a new beginning. He did not need cheering. He did not need applause. What he needed was momentum, action, discipline, because he knew now that dreams without effort are just hallucinations, and he had lived in that fog long enough. His phone vibrated in his pocket again. The same apps, the same distractions, the same trap calling him back. But this time he did not look. He did not care. He knew that everything he wanted lived on the other side of everything he had been avoiding. The goals that once overwhelmed him now looked like battles he was born to fight. The fear that once crippled him now looked small in the shadow of death's certainty. He was no longer afraid of starting. He was afraid of stopping again, afraid of returning to the numb, empty state he had been living in. The memory of that stillness, of wasting time while life marched past him, was more terrifying than any failure could ever be. He thought about his dreams, those big, bold, breathtaking dreams that had felt impossible for so long. Writing a book, starting a business, rebuilding broken relationships, changing lives, leaving a mark. They had once seemed like distant stars, unreachable and faint. Now, they felt like fires waiting to be lit. His mind flashed back to all the people who had told him he had time, that he should take it slow, that he should find himself before acting. He saw their faces, remembered their words, and realized they were just as lost as he had been. Most people sleepwalk through life, cradling comfort like a blanket, while the clock ticks louder and louder each day. But he had woken up, and now, sleep was no longer an option. He reached his destination, a quiet corner of the local park, the place he used to sit for hours doing nothing. But this time, he had come to do everything. He sat down on the old wooden bench, opened his notebook again, and began writing like a man possessed. Not by fear, but by fire. Ideas flowed from him like a river freed from a dam. Plans, timelines, milestones. His hand ached from writing, but he welcomed the pain. It meant he was building something real. Around him, life moved. Children played. Birds sang. The wind danced through the trees. And for once, he was not watching it from the outside. He was part of it, alive in it, no longer waiting for a perfect moment, no longer postponing the things that mattered. Every moment of hesitation he had once felt was now buried under a mountain of resolve. He would fail, yes, many times. He would stumble. He would face ridicule, doubt, fatigue. But he would rise every time, because now he understood. Time wasted is life wasted, and he had already wasted too much. He looked up at the sky, its vastness no longer intimidating, but inviting. A canvas, a challenge, a calling. He thought about the person he used to be, the boy who dreamed but never dared, who wanted greatness but settled for comfort. That version of him was gone now, buried in the silence of that earlier morning when the mirror spoke louder than words. He would never be that boy again. He could not be. The truth had burned too deep. He stood up from the bench and took a deep breath, letting the wind fill his lungs and blow away the dust of his former self. There was no ceremony, no crowd, no applause, just a quiet, burning promise between him and the life waiting on the other side of his courage. And then, with nothing but the weight of purpose on his shoulders and a future that no longer felt far away, he took the first real step, not toward a destination, but toward who he was meant to be. He took that first real step, and with it, everything changed, not around him, but within. It was not loud. It was not dramatic, but it was powerful, because it came from a place deeper than motivation. It came from the wreckage of regret and the ashes of wasted years. That step was not a sprint, not a leap, but a deliberate declaration to himself that he would never again live passively while the world moved on without him. With every step forward, he peeled away a layer of his old identity, the procrastinator, the excuse-maker, the dreamer who never dared. In their place, a new self emerged, raw but ready, fragile but fearless. He began to organize his day with military precision, blocking time like a soldier arranges weapons, knowing that each hour was ammunition and each distraction a bullet aimed at his purpose. He deleted the apps that once devoured his time, like vultures over a carcass. He unsubscribed from noise. He silenced the endless buzz of other people's lives and focused on building his own. The first morning was the hardest. His bed was warm. His room was quiet. The old whispers returned. Rest a little longer. You have time. You can start tomorrow. But he sat up anyway, every muscle resisting, every thought fighting him. He remembered his friend's coffin, that photo, that final caption, and the lie of later shattered all over again. He wrote his tasks for the day on paper, in ink, permanent, visible, real. One by one, he faced them. Not perfectly, not without resistance, but with a fury that refused to let him quit. The voice in his head changed. Where it once said, "What if I fail?" it now growled, "What if I waste one more day?" He carried that urgency like armor, and the world noticed. People around him began to ask questions. What had changed? Why did he seem sharper, more focused, more alive? They asked for advice, some in awe, others in envy. He gave no long speeches, no magical hacks, just the truth. I stopped waiting to feel ready. And that truth, spoken simply, shook people more than any sermon, because deep down, they all knew they were waiting too, waiting for permission, for confidence, for inspiration, while their lives slipped through cracks they refused to seal. But he no longer waited. He no longer apologized for wanting more. His goals were no longer secrets. He spoke them out loud, owned them, shared them, and more importantly, pursued them daily with a discipline that bordered on obsession. He began waking before the sun, watching the sky bleed into dawn as he worked on the dreams he had once buried under sleep. He trained his body, pushed it, punished it, because he understood now that strength was not a gift but a practice. He read like a starving man devours food, filling his mind with ideas that challenged and elevated him. And when setbacks came, as they always do, he did not fold. He fell forward, learned, adjusted, fought back. Pain became a companion, but no longer his master. It was just a signal that he was doing something that mattered. His confidence was no longer borrowed or begged for. It was earned, day by day, through the sweat of consistency. And still, even in this new rhythm, he remembered. He remembered who he used to be, the version of himself that he left behind that morning, the ghost who stared at clocks and waited for miracles. And every time he felt weak, every time doubt crept back in, he thought of that ghost, that cold coffee, that dusty notebook, that coffin, and he returned to the fire, not the fire of excitement, but of resolve. He knew the world owed him nothing, that dreams are only as real as the work behind them, and that time, relentless, ruthless time, would not slow for anyone. So he matched its pace, outran it when he could, endured it when he must, and with every day that passed, he built something no one could take from him, a life of intent, a life of truth, a life of no more excuses, the kind of life that, when death does come, it will not be met with regret, but with a full heart and a steady soul. And the boy who once wasted time, he would not be remembered, because the man who chose to rise, he had already begun to build a legacy. He had begun to build a legacy, not one carved in marble or broadcast in headlines, but one that would live in quiet moments, in invisible spaces between each hour used with intention and each minute no longer wasted. His legacy was not about grandeur, but grit. It was built in early mornings, when the world still slept, and he rose anyway. It was laid down in every decision to show up, to do the work, to push past comfort when no one was watching and no applause was waiting. Slowly, the people closest to him began to feel the change, not just in his words, but in his presence. There was a steadiness now, a sharpness in his eyes, a new kind of silence around him, not empty, but full of clarity, full of purpose, full of something powerful that had been dormant far too long. He no longer needed to explain himself, no longer felt the urge to prove anything to anyone. His life began speaking louder than his voice ever could. The man who once avoided challenges now chased them. He volunteered for the difficult tasks. He asked hard questions. He faced uncomfortable truths. Because he understood something most people avoid. Comfort is a cage. It wraps you slowly, softly, makes you feel safe, while it robs you of your hunger, your potential, your power. He had lived in that cage. He had called it peace. But it was prison, and he had broken out, not through luck, not through inspiration, but through choice. A single, burning, non-negotiable choice to stop wasting time. That choice echoed through everything he did. He no longer scrolled endlessly through other people's lives. He built his own. He no longer waited for opportunity. He created it. He no longer feared judgment. He feared stagnation. When others hesitated, he moved. When others made excuses, he made progress. When others laughed, doubted, or criticized, he listened, but only for a moment. Then he returned to the path, his path, because now every second counted. Time was not a friend or a foe. It was a tool, a test, a teacher, and he intended to master it. Even when things went wrong, and they did, often, he did not crumble. He had learned that failure is not the end. Wasting time is. Pain did not paralyze him anymore. It sharpened him. When he lost money, he learned. When he lost people, he reflected. When he lost motivation, he relied on discipline, because he had rewired himself. His identity was no longer tied to outcomes or recognition. It was rooted in effort, in showing up, in never giving in to the lie that tomorrow will always be there. Because he had seen what happens when time runs out. He had buried dreams in silence. He had watched caskets lower into the ground while voices cried over all the things left undone, unsaid, unlived. And he refused to let that be his story. So, he trained like time was chasing him. He loved like time was fragile. He worked like every moment was a gift. Because it was. The days turned into months, and the months began to shape a man unrecognizable to the one who once stared at his reflection with hollow eyes and a paralyzed soul. Now his eyes burned not with sadness, but with fire. His voice no longer shook with doubt, but commanded space. His footsteps no longer wandered, but left prints that others began to follow. People began asking him not just what he did, but how he found the strength, how he kept going. And he told them the truth always. I stopped asking for time and started using it. It was never easy. It was never without sacrifice. There were moments when the weight felt unbearable, when rest sounded like relief, when slipping back into the old version of himself felt tempting. But then he remembered the silence of wasted years, the ache of potential left unused, the mirror that once asked him if this version of himself was all he would ever be. And he pressed on, because legacy is not written in a single day, but in thousands of small choices no one sees. He chose discipline over delay, focus over fear, meaning over comfort, again and again, until those choices became instinct, until his very heartbeat began to echo the rhythm of a man who was not waiting to live, but already living, fully, deeply, fiercely. And still, each morning, he rose as if he was beginning again, not because he had not accomplished anything, but because he knew the mission was never to reach a destination. It was to honor the time he had left, to extract meaning from every minute, to leave behind a life that spoke long after he was gone, a life that said, here was someone who refused to waste the one thing no one can ever get back. And so, he walked forward every day, into a future he no longer feared, because now he was not running from time. He was running with it. He was running with it, shoulder to shoulder with the invisible force that once terrified him, no longer haunted by the seconds slipping away, but fueled by their presence. Every tick of the clock was no longer a countdown to regret, but a metronome guiding his march forward, a reminder that this life, this chance, this breath, was his to use or to waste. And he had made his choice. He was no longer the man who begged for more time, prayed for motivation, or made promises he never kept. He had become the kind of man who wakes up tired, but gets up anyway. The kind of man who falls, but rises faster each time. The kind of man who, even in doubt, acts. Even in fear, moves. Even in pain, grows. And it was in those small, daily decisions, those unseen victories, that his transformation rooted itself deeply. He knew the world would never slow down for him, that nobody would pause the clock while he found his courage, that no one was going to save him from the life he was wasting. So he saved himself, not in one grand moment, but through relentless persistence. He understood now that greatness is not born in comfort. It is forged in struggle and silence, in the spaces where no one claps and no one watches. It is built when you keep showing up, day after day, hour after hour, even when nothing seems to be changing, especially then. And that is exactly what he did. He turned routines into rituals, turned repetition into mastery. Where others saw boredom, he saw progress. Where others waited to feel ready, he acted through the discomfort. And the compound effect of that discipline, of showing up consistently when motivation failed, began to reshape not just his outcomes, but his identity. His muscles grew stronger, his mind sharper, his spirit steadier. The man who once needed to be pushed now pulled others forward. The man who once needed reminders now inspired them, not through words, but through proof, through presence, through example. He became the proof that you could change, that you could rewrite your story, that no matter how long you had wasted time, you still had time left, as long as you used it like it mattered. And it did matter, more than ever, because he had tasted both sides now. The side where time slips through numb fingers, and the side where every second is an investment. He chose the latter. Every single day, he planned his weeks like a strategist, tracked his progress like a scientist, protected his energy like a warrior. The distractions that once seduced him no longer held power. They were the enemy now, and he treated them as such. Social media, cut down to minutes, not hours. Idle conversations, replaced with intentional connection. Mindless entertainment, traded for learning, building, growing. And the more he eliminated the noise, the more he heard the voice inside him, the the one that had always been there but buried under the clutter, the voice that whispered, "You were made for more. Not more success, not more fame, but more life, real life, the kind you live wide awake, the kind that stretches you, breaks you, builds you." Every time he listened to that voice, he grew, not always instantly, not without failure, but always forward. And when doubts came, and they did in waves, he no longer drowned in them. He let them wash over him, knock him down, and then stood again, dripping with resilience. Because he knew something most people spend a lifetime avoiding. The pain of discipline is sharp, but it passes. The pain of regret is silent, and it stays. He chose the former, over and over again. And as he climbed through months and then years of deliberate living, he began to see what few ever get to see: the full bloom of potential awakened. He wrote the book, launched the business, reconnected with those he had pushed away during his numb years. He showed up for people, not with guilt, but with presence, with energy, with depth. And people noticed, not because he told them he had changed, but because they felt it. The way he listened, the way he moved, the way he carried himself, like every moment mattered, because to him it did. He began mentoring others, not out of pride, but out of gratitude. He had been in their place, lost, numb, drifting, and now he handed them the same brutal truth that had changed him. Time is not the problem. You are. Some rejected it. Some called him intense. But those who were ready, truly ready, understood. They began their own battles, their own rebuilding, because sometimes all it takes is one example to know it is possible. And he had become that example. Not perfect, not invincible, but relentless, focused, free, and most importantly, alive. More alive than he had ever been, because he was no longer existing. He was living, and he was just getting started. And he was just getting started, because every day felt like a new beginning, a blank canvas waiting to be painted not with colors of chance, but with bold strokes of choice. There was no going back now, not because he had everything figured out, but because he had finally understood the one truth that changed everything. The direction of your life is not determined by what you hope for, but by what you repeatedly do. And he had chosen, once and for all, to do the things that mattered. The habits that once enslaved him had been shattered by routine and replaced by systems that served him. He no longer lived on autopilot. He woke with intention, moved with precision, and spoke with conviction. Each morning began with silence, not to scroll, but to reflect, to plan, to breathe deeply and remind himself why he started. He would sit quietly with his coffee, not mindlessly sipping while drowning in distractions, but drinking it like a warrior sharpening his sword. He had learned to respect the morning, not as a time to rush, but as the foundation of his dominance over the day. From there, everything flowed. His workouts were no longer about vanity. They were rituals of discipline, of power, of defiance against the comfort that once seduced him. The iron did not lie. The sweat did not negotiate. And every rep, every mile, every drop of sweat was a promise to himself that he would not return to the man who wasted time waiting for life to hand him something it never would. When he worked fully, no multitasking, no noise, no distractions, just deep, focused effort, because he had learned the difference between being busy and being effective. One keeps you spinning, the other moves you forward. He chose forward, and when he rested, he did so with peace, not guilt, because rest, earned through battle, is not laziness. It is recovery. It is reloading for war. He was not perfect, but he was aligned. And that alignment, that clarity, made him unstoppable. The world still moved as it always had. People still made excuses, still waited for someday, still drowned themselves in entertainment and comfort and false narratives. But he no longer belonged to that world. He had become a builder of himself, of his vision, of a future that would not create itself. He did not seek easy. He sought meaningful. He did not wait to be understood. He stood firm in what he had chosen, and those who walked beside him had changed too. He no longer surrounded himself with those who drained him. He curated his circle with intention. Only those who respected time were welcome in his space. Only those who were building something, striving, growing. They fed off each other's energy like a brotherhood of warriors refusing to die with their potential still buried inside them. Together they rose. They challenged one another, celebrated wins, confronted failures, not with pity, but with accountability. It was not about being better than others. It was about being better than yesterday. And slowly, a movement began around him, not of followers, but of fellow soldiers. People who had been drifting but now anchored in purpose. People who had once said, "I'll do it tomorrow," now saying, "I'm doing it now." And the ripple effect spread. One person choosing not to waste time became a beacon, a signal to others that it was possible, that they were not stuck, that they were just sedated by their own distractions, and it was time to wake up. He still faced resistance, of course. The world still tempted him with shortcuts, with pleasure, with the siren song of the easy life. But now he heard it clearly, and he laughed, because he had tasted the thrill of growth, the ecstasy of discipline, the unmatched high of waking up to a life you are actively shaping with your own hands. And there was no pleasure in the world that could compete with that. He did not need permission anymore. Not from his past, not from society, not from fear. He had earned the right to call himself a creator of his own life. Every action he took was a brick. Every hour used with purpose was a beam. Every day stacked with discipline was a wall protecting his legacy. And what he was building was not just success, but significance. A life that would echo. A life that would leave fingerprints on others long after he was gone. Not because he was loud, not because he was perfect, but because he had refused to waste the one resource none of us can ever get back. And that truth fueled him endlessly. Because he had walked through the valley of wasted years. He had faced the shame, the regret, the stillness. And he had risen, not once, but daily, with fire in his chest and purpose in his spine. He was not extraordinary. He had no superpowers. But he had made one extraordinary decision, to stop wasting time. And that one decision had done what no book, no guru, no moment of inspiration ever could. It had changed everything. And it would continue to. Because he would never forget where he came from. And he would never stop running, with time, not from it, until his very last breath. Until his very last breath, because now, every inhale meant something. Every exhale carried the weight of intention. He was no longer a man simply surviving, floating through the current of existence, but a force moving upstream, shaping the flow, commanding his direction. The days of passivity were over, and in their place stood a philosophy carved into his bones. Time is the most honest currency of life. You cannot cheat it. You cannot beg it. You can only spend it. And he had made a vow, carved deep within his soul, that he would spend it with ferocity. His calendar was no longer a vague list of wishes. It was a war plan. Every block of time was owned, fought for, defended. He was not just managing time. He was mastering it. Understanding that freedom is not found in having nothing to do, but in having something worth doing every single day. Even the mundane had purpose now. The workouts, the reading, the emails, the conversations, they were bricks in the wall of the life he was building. He had burned a bridge back to mediocrity, turned comfort into his enemy, and made fear his advisor. When fear whispered, "You are not ready," he replied, "Neither was the man I buried inside me." But he still rose. There was a power in that awareness, a brutal clarity that drove him. He did not numb pain anymore. He studied it. He did not avoid failure. He examined it. Every mistake became a message. Every setback a strategy. He had discovered what so many die never realizing, that success is not the absence of failure, but the refusal to remain stuck in it. And now, the world looked different to him. He walked through the noise of modern life, the scrolling, the gossip, the chasing of illusions, and saw it for what it was, sedation. A beautiful trap. A slow death disguised as entertainment. He knew how it worked. He had been its prisoner. But now he stood above it, immune not because he was better, but because he was aware. And awareness is the beginning of liberation. He began to teach others, not as a guru but as a guide, not with speeches, but with presence. Young men lost in distraction came to him. Women stuck in cycles of self-doubt, colleagues buried in busyness but starving for meaning. He told them all the same thing. You do not need more time. You need to stop wasting the time you already have. Some wept. Some resisted. But the truth did its work, slicing through illusion like a sword. And those who accepted it began their own transformation. He watched it happen again and again. People who once hit snooze 10 times now rising with fire. People who once drowned in excuses now executing plans. Not because of magic, not because of talent, but because they chose. The same choice he had made. The choice that few ever do. And it was that simple. Brutally simple. Most people were waiting for a miracle. But the miracle was this. Time had always been enough. It was never the problem. The problem was how they spent it. The clock was never the enemy. Their choices were. And he reminded himself of that every morning. In the cold silence before dawn, he would sit still, breathe deep, and say to himself, "Today is not just another day. It is a piece of my life I will never get back. How will I use it?" That question guided everything. It kept him focused when distractions called, kept him grounded when success tempted pride, kept him humble when people praised his transformation. Because he knew the truth. He was still just a man, one breath away from falling back into the comfort he once drowned in. And so, he kept his rituals sacred, his environment protected, his vision clear. He built systems that would outlast emotion. He crafted habits that served him even on his worst days. And when pain came, when life threw its inevitable storms, he did not collapse. He absorbed it, transformed it, used it as fuel. Because now, even suffering had purpose. Even struggle was sacred. He did not ask for an easier life. He asked for strength. He trained his mind to endure boredom, to conquer cravings, to reject ease. Because greatness, he now understood, is not about what you do when you feel good, but what you do when you do not. And in that discipline, he found freedom, real freedom, the kind most never taste because they are too busy chasing pleasure to find purpose. But he had found it. He had built it, brick by brick, day by day, choice by brutal, beautiful choice. And now, as the years began to pass, not in a blur, but in blazing clarity, he stood taller, moved stronger, lived deeper. People spoke his name in rooms he had never entered, not because of marketing, but because of impact. Because when someone lives with intention, the world notices. He was no longer concerned with applause. He did not need likes, or shares, or followers. His success was measured in alignment, in peace, in the ability to look in the mirror and see a man he respected, a man he would follow. And when he thought about the end, his last day, his last breath, he did not fear it, because he knew that when it came, it would not find him empty. It would not find him with songs unsung, books unwritten, strength untested. No, it would find him with calloused hands, a full heart, and a life lived like it mattered, because he had stopped wasting time. And in doing so, he had finally started living. He had finally started living, not in the artificial sense that most people advertise on screens with forced smiles and borrowed dreams, but in the raw, undeniable truth of waking up every single day and knowing why. His mornings were no longer reactions. They were declarations, a silent war cry echoing from his soul. This is my time, and I will not waste it. That phrase became his anchor, his battle hymn, his reminder when temptations whispered and old habits clawed at the edges of his resolve. Because even after all the progress, after all the change, the past did not vanish. It lingered, waiting for a moment of weakness to creep back in. But he was not that man anymore. The man who used to live on autopilot, who blurred days into nights with meaningless distractions, who silenced the ache of unfulfilled purpose with temporary noise. He had been buried, one disciplined day at a time. What stood in his place now was a warrior of habit, a craftsman of routine, a student of discipline. Not flashy, not flawless, but relentless. And it showed. In his posture, in his tone, in his work, in the way people fell silent when he entered a room. Not out of intimidation, but out of quiet respect. Because his presence was no longer loud. It was solid. You could feel the weight of someone who had walked through fire and decided to keep walking anyway. He had learned that true power is not in what you say, but in how you live. His results began to speak louder than his explanations ever could. While others wasted time proving their worth through arguments and opinions, he proved his through action, through consistency, through results stacked patiently over time, like bricks forming a monument no storm could shake. His health flourished, not from shortcuts, but from discipline. His relationships deepened, not because he demanded loyalty, but because he gave presence. His finances improved, not from luck, but from mastery of focus and delayed gratification. And his mind, once cluttered with doubt, with noise, with the voice of a victim, now operated with clarity and command. Each day, he journaled, not just to track goals, but to sharpen self-awareness. He reflected ruthlessly, celebrated progress, confronted weaknesses, because growth, he had discovered, was not an accident. It was an obligation, a responsibility, a sacred duty to the potential he had once buried in delay and excuses. And with that awareness, he stopped envying others. Comparison died the day he realized time was his most precious asset, and no one could use as better than him. He respected others' journeys, but no longer tried to mimic them. He walked his own path, not faster than others, but more focused, not louder, but more aligned. And with every new level reached, he realized he was just scratching the surface. That purpose, like time, is not something you find once and cling to. It is something you must rediscover, redefine, and recommit to every single day. So he did. He recommitted through resistance, through fatigue, through uncertainty. He kept moving forward not because it was easy, but because stopping was no longer an option. He had seen the cost of stopping, the subtle way life slips away when you stop pursuing the things that matter. He had once thought wasting time meant sitting around doing nothing. Now he knew it meant doing the wrong things for too long, staying in the wrong places, entertaining the wrong thoughts, being surrounded by people who celebrated mediocrity instead of growth. So he cleared his life like a battlefield after war, cleaned out the mental clutter, severed the toxic ties, let go of the comfortable commitments that were never aligned with who he wanted to become. In their place, he planted seeds of intention, purposeful people, books that challenged his mind, environments that demanded his best, challenges that scared him into growth. He understood that the greatest enemy of excellence was not failure, but distraction. So he eliminated the unnecessary with brutal focus. His phone, once an extension of his hand, was now a tool, used, then put away. Notifications were turned off, news feeds ignored. His attention was no longer for sale, because attention, he knew, is the first step to mastery. And wherever it goes, life follows. He had learned to protect it like gold, and that protection paid off. Opportunities began to appear, not because he waited, but because he prepared. He had become the kind of man opportunity looks for. Prepared, present, proven. He walked into rooms that once intimidated him and took up space with quiet confidence. He was no longer trying to convince people of his worth. He carried it. He embodied it. And the world responded, not always with applause, but with respect. Respect that comes not from perfection, but from presence. From showing up again and again when quitting would have been easier. From choosing growth over comfort, service over ego, excellence over excuses. He understood now that success was not something you chase. It was something you attract by becoming the kind of person who earns it. So he focused less on what he wanted, and more on who he needed to become. That shift changed everything. Because when you stop asking, "What can I get?" and start asking, "Who can I become?" the world opens up in ways you never imagined. And so, with each day, he became. Not all at once, not perfectly, but deliberately, consistently, patiently. He understood that his journey would not end until his heart stopped beating. And even then, his impact would echo. Because a life lived with relentless purpose leaves behind more than memories. It leaves behind momentum. A legacy not of wealth or titles, but of example. A signal to everyone still sleeping through their days. Asterisk, it is possible. You can change, but only if you stop wasting time. Asterisk, and so he continued. One step, one day, one choice at a time, until the end. And even then he knew. His story would not be about how much time he had, but about what he did with it. What he did with it, that would be the legacy. Not the trophies on shelves, Not the zeros in his bank account, not the applause that came and went like waves, but the decisions made in silence, the hours nobody saw, the mornings he rose when everything in him begged to rest. That was the truth of it all. Greatness is built in the invisible. While the world applauded the final result, he honored the process. He had learned to fall in love with it. The grind, the repetition, the lonely, brutal consistency. There was no spotlight there. Just the echo of his own footsteps. Just the voice that said, "Keep going," when everything else whispered, "Stop." And through that obedience to discipline, he found freedom. Not freedom from effort, but freedom from chaos. Freedom from the self-inflicted wounds of delay, of excuse, of distraction. That freedom gave him clarity. Clarity gave him focus. And focus made him dangerous, in the best way possible. Because now his life was a weapon for good. A tool to uplift, to build, to inspire. He had become a living example that time, when respected, repays you tenfold, and when wasted, punishes without mercy. He had learned this not from textbooks or TED Talks, but from blood, sweat, and breakdowns. From nights he stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, wondering if he was too late. From mornings when the mirror felt like a judgment, not a reflection. But those were the days that broke him open and rebuilt him stronger. And now, those same mornings were sacred. His mirror no longer accused, it saluted. Saluted a man who had stopped negotiating with time. Who no longer waited to be ready, no longer waited to be chosen, no longer waited for perfect conditions. He chose himself. Every single day. He made his hours sacred, his work intentional, his rest earned. And that power, the power of ownership, radiated through everything he did. People felt it in his handshake, heard it in his voice, saw it in his pace. He was not faster than others, just more deliberate. He no longer filled his calendar to feel productive. He filled it to feel aligned. If something did not bring him closer to the man he was becoming, it was removed. He had no more time for half-hearted maybes. No more room for emotional freeloaders. No more space for distractions dressed as obligations. He had become ruthless with what he allowed into his life, not from coldness, but from clarity. Because time had taught him, what you tolerate becomes your standard. And he had raised his standards beyond compromise. People admired his strength, but they did not see the storms he had walked through. They did not see the moments he nearly gave in, the quiet nights when doubt tried to seduce him back into comfort. They did not hear the silence of empty rooms where he trained, studied, built, repeated, alone, uncelebrated it. They only saw the result, and that was fine, because he had never done it for recognition. He had done it because he finally realized the cost of not doing it. He had tasted the pain of wasted years, and he had vowed never to swallow that bitterness again. So he moved differently now. Every action a vote for the man he would one day be proud to die as. Every hour accounted for. Every choice intentional. Even his leisure had meaning. He did not numb. He refueled. He did not escape. He recentered. He did not run from pressure. He walked into it and used it to sharpen himself. The life he was building was not a sprint. It was a sculpture. And he was the sculptor. Every habit, every decision, every morning routine was a chisel in his hand. He carved out weakness, smoothed out fear, etched in character. And when people asked what had changed, why he was so focused, so intense, so alive, he simply said, "I stopped wasting time." Because that was all it took. That one choice. That one moment of truth where he stopped looking outward and finally looked inward. No more blaming. No more waiting. No more hoping. Just doing. Being. Becoming. And though his journey was far from over, though he knew storms would come again, he no longer feared them. Because his foundation was built on truth, not trends. On effort, not emotion. On legacy, not likes. He walked now with the quiet power of a man who had made peace with his past and a covenant with his future. Every step forward was a message to the world. Asterisk, I am here. I am awake. I am unshakable. Asterisk, not because life got easier, but because he got stronger, more focused, more grounded. He had stopped wasting time, and in return, time had given him everything. Not all at once, not easily, but faithfully. And as he stood under the rising sun once again, notebook in hand, purpose in his breath, he knew something most people never realize until it is too late. This is it. This moment. This hour. This life. It is not a rehearsal. It is not a draft. It is the real thing. And he would live it. Not someday. Not when it felt perfect. But now. Fully. Fiercely. Forever. And so, as the sun rises and time marches forward, remember this. You do not need more hours in a day. You need to make the hours you already have count. Because the clock will not pause for your excuses. It will not slow down for your fears. It will not wait for you to feel ready. You are not promised tomorrow. But you do have today. This moment. This breath. This choice. You can keep waiting. Or you can start building. You can keep dreaming. Or you can start doing. The life you want is not in the future. It is hidden inside the choices you make right now. So stop wasting time. Own it. Honor it. Live it. Because one day you will look back. And the question will not be, did I have enough time? It will be, did I use the time I had well? Make sure your answer is a resounding yes. Not just for the world, but for yourself. You owe it to the life still inside you. You owe it to the time still in your hands. Start now. And never stop.